What we're going to do in this tutorial is introduce you to the components of the After Effects workspace. If you take a look at my screen, I have my application window open and it's maximized, so it's taking up as much room as it can in my monitor. Whenever you're working inside After Effects, you're going to want to have as much screen real estate as possible. You can see that if I look over here in the upper right hand corner, we've got an indicator for Workspace, and then there's a drop down menu, and by default we're on Standard. And you can see that there are some other options and that they are connected to the different sort of things that you might be doing with After Effects. All panels is going to show you every panel that could possibly be open. That's a lot. Animation will give you access to some of the things that you would want if you were doing animation and modifying those properties. Effects is going to do the same, and we'll talk about some of these as we get into some of the more sophisticated uses of After Effects, but just so that you know it's there. And also, if you go and open up After Effects on a computer where someone else has been working and things don't look the way that you want them to, you can usually just jump back to Standard or reset Standard to have things look and be placed where you're familiar with them. One of the first things that you want to do whenever you're working with After Effects is start to figure out what kinds of tools are you going to need to have access to, what kinds of things do you want to do with your project, and how can you best orient the workspace so that it works with you instead of against you. If we look in the upper left-hand corner here, we have the tool panel. This has selection tools and some camera tools, some creation tools in terms of shapes and pen and type. We've got some ways to create different modifications to existing things. We've got some sort of fancier tools with the rotor brush and the puppet pin, but we'll get more into those at a different time. Here we've got the project panel. This is where we'll have connections to all of the information that you'll either import into After Effects from your computer's hard drive or things that you'll build within After Effects itself. Then we have the composition window. The composition window is going to show us what our project looks like as we build it. We'll build it down here in the timeline. The timeline is this portion of what we see at the bottom of our screen, and the time graph is what we see over here. And there's a lot of potential and power in both sides of this little line here, and we'll get more into those as we talk about specific modifications to and creations of projects. If we look over here on the right-hand side, we see that we have an info panel, and behind that an audio panel. You can dock panels together. A lot of times that helps conserve space and also helps you get access to different things as you need them. If I click on the audio tab, you can see that we've got a audio meter that lets us see the relative decibel value of any audio files that might be playing. And the info tab gives us basically a readout of some of the different things that we might be working on. There's not a lot of changes that you make here, but as you can see, if I move my mouse over my composition, if I'm over the blue, you can see the red, green, blue combination and then the alpha channel value. And you can also see the X and Y coordinates that let me see where things are placed. So when you start to get into some very exacting modifications of projects, this can help you. If I move my mouse over the green circle, you can see the color changes there too. Below the info panel, we have the preview panel, and the preview panel is going to give you access to the controls for playing the composition as you're building it. The RAM preview is going to be probably one of the most important buttons or functions that you have within After Effects, but we'll talk more about that as we get into projects. But you also have access to things like frame rates and resolutions and some other options in terms of your preview. Below here we have effects and presets. This is where you're going to be able to make some choices about the kinds of effects you want to apply to different elements within your composition. And I just think of them as, sometimes we can use them as corrective measures. Other times we'll want to use them as eye candy, to make things look a little bit different. But there's a lot of ways to combine effects for some really interesting and unique kinds of results. A couple of things to talk about in terms of how to modify the application window so that you get access to the kinds of things that you need. You can obviously come up here to standard and grab onto something else, say animation, and then you can see that we still have the composition and the timeline and the time graph and the project, but over here we've got a couple of different sorts of tools that are more relevant when we're working with some animation effects inside After Effects. If we want to go to all panels just to see all of the craziness that pops up, you can see we have a lot of the different tools here that can start to really push the power of After Effects. If we jump back to standard though, just to talk about some of the different ways that we can modify things, if we want to combine, say, preview into our info and audio, we can click on this and you can see it gets highlighted, and then I can move it up and you can see that the purple square in the middle of my info tab is now highlighted. I can also move it up or down. If I drop it into that middle purple square though, you can see that preview is now contained within the same panel as info and audio. If I bring it down, you can see that we have a new window again for preview, so where it was before. If I bring it and we come to the top part here, you can see that preview moves up here, and if I come down here and move over to the side, you can see that preview pops up here, and now we've got info and audio, so kind of squished over here on the side. And this is where being able to reset standard helps. We'll jump back to where it was. You can also resize the panel placement by moving over the kind of edges of where things meet. If we want to give effects and presets a little bit more room, we can click and drag, and that sort of truncates composition a bit, but it gives us a little bit more room over here that you may or may not need. It just depends. You can also click and drag like this, and again, in a little composition like this, doesn't really make a whole lot of difference, but once you get into more complicated projects, you're going to want to maximize different aspects of the interface often. The last thing that I'll show you before we wrap this up is the little view percentage over here in the bottom left-hand corner. This is our magnification ratio, as you can see from the little tooltip that pops up there. But one of the most important things to remember when you're working in After Effects is that the frame that you're working within is going to be what's visible in your final output of the project. So being able to see the frame at all times is going to be of the utmost importance, because otherwise you can end up with some different things that kind of show up in your final render that maybe you didn't want there, or it doesn't look the way that you want it to. Right now we're at 50%, and because of the changes that I've made to the interface, I can't actually see all of my composition. If I come down to the drop down and I go to Fit, now you can see the edges, and I can see where that star and circle are placed in the overall composition. If I zoom in to say like 100%, you can see that we're filling the composition window, but if I don't remember that this is at 100%, which means that I've sort of gone beyond the boundaries of my frame, then I can end up orchestrating things within this window, and then my final output actually shows me a lot more of the screen. So if that doesn't make complete sense at this point, stick with us. We'll show you some more ways to modify the interface as you work on different projects and as you access different tools.